and Zechariah, and all of these names that are so foreign to us. Then when we get to the gospel writers, we have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable to you, the Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. A few months ago, a friend of mine donated a kidney to a total stranger. Years of amazing experiences, incredible joys, and no doubt a few sorrows now stretch out before the recipient. Years she would not have had were it not for my friend. Now, my friend didn't get up one morning and say to herself, I think I'll go down to the hospital and volunteer for surgery. Thousands of lives, however, could be saved if just a tenth of the adults in this world just decided to share their spare. But donating a part of your body to someone else is not necessarily an easy decision, or at least not an easy decision to follow through on. Life-changing decisions are rarely easy to make. And I'm always curious about people who make those decisions. What drives them to do it? I hold the same curiosity for the characters in today's gospel reading. James and John were mending their nets. A torn net cost fishermen hours of labor spent mending the net instead of fishing. No fish means no pay. For James and John, to drop their mending means they are walking away not only from that day's income, but from future potential income. And Andrew and Peter are casting their nets into the sea, likely catching bait fish if they're standing on the shore. And again, they're preparing for a day of fishing, a day of laboring for the money they need to support their families. And Jesus walks up, no net in hand, no boat on a tether, and says, follow me. So Matthew says they followed him immediately. For four grown men with families to feed to just drop everything and go off with a complete stranger? Yeah, makes me curious. You know, in today's world, if someone just drops everything, quits a job they've had for years, drops out of school short of their goals, to go off and do something completely different, we say they are either foolish or adventurous. And we laud someone who, and we celebrate them who succeed in their endeavors. But we criticize or click our tongues at those whose dreams don't come true. Yet when we read this message about four grown men dropping everything to follow a complete stranger immediately, we think, oh, of course, the disciples didn't have to stop and think about following Jesus. Of course, they wouldn't spend any time weighing their options. But meanwhile, here in this world, if someone says that God or Jesus called them to do something, we're skeptical. Until that person succeeds. Then, and only then, do we say, oh, of course God called them to do that. Some might say the disciples' decision was easy because life wasn't as complicated back in 30 AD. Andrew, Peter, James, and John didn't have health insurance benefits to pay for, didn't have 401k plans, they didn't have to consider any of that to leave their job, they didn't have car payments or their kids' braces to pay for, they didn't have credit card debt, but, you know, they did have taxes to pay whether they caught fish or not. They had a boat to pay for and keep up. They had homes to provide for their families, either by purchasing them or renting them. Yes, there were landlords back then. They had food to purchase for themselves and their families. They had clothing, household goods. All of those things cost money. They had all of the basic human needs that anyone living in today's world had. So walking away from their only livelihood was a very rash decision. Even more so, really, because they were day laborers. There wasn't paid vacation time, no sick pay. So I wonder whether they actually considered their options even for a minute or not. And how foolish did the other fishermen, their friends, their families, think they were for dropping their nets and following this unusual man. God can call us to very unusual circumstances. So unusual and so sudden that we appear fools to our friends and our family, especially since God tends to call just normal people like you and me. The disciples, at least the ones we know very much about, they were just average folk. There were 7 fishermen, the four we talk about today, and possibly Nathaniel, Thomas, and Philip, a tax collector, Matthew, Simon the Zealot, someone who was working to overthrow the Roman government, and then there was Judas, who was a thief. They had to have appeared as great fools, making such a life-changing decision to follow this unknown guy from absolute nowhere. And when you think about where their decision ultimately led them, they did look like fools. With the exception of John, whom legend says escaped persecution and lived to die from old age, all of the disciples died as martyrs. Some were crucified, some stabbed, one was stoned and clubbed, Paul was beheaded. If we lived back in those times, I wonder if we too might have called them fools. Today, with our hindsight being 2020, we say that they made a wise choice because of their sacrifices. We know, or at least have an idea of who Jesus was and what he taught and why we want to follow him. We know the rest of the story. But the 12 that Jesus first called did not even have an inkling of what was in store for them. It would have been many months before Jesus asks, "Who do you think I am?" And Peter blurts out that he is the Messiah. They have yet to see Jesus heal a sick child, restore a blind man's sight, or restore the health of a woman who has been bleeding for years. Somehow the scene of them dropping their nets, okay, I gotta tell you, it makes me think of that commercial. I can't remember what it's for, but Joey's standing on the shore and the bunch, "Yay, go Joey, go get the pineapples, go Joey," even though Joey is about to be eaten by a sea monster. Except that the tables are turned, and the other fishermen are catcalling and telling these 4, "Yeah, go ahead, follow this random guy. You're going to be eaten by a sea monster. Or come back with your tails between your legs." And you know, in the gospel account, according to John, that actually does happen. Bewildered and disheartened after Jesus' crucifixion, the disciples do return to fishing, only to have the resurrected Jesus show up on shore, cook them some fish, and say, "Not so fast, guys. I gave you a job to do." See, because we know the rest of the story, we know that because these men chose to drop their nets and follow Jesus, the world was changed for the better. They didn't know that they would spend 3 years traveling throughout Judea, walking all of Judea, witnessing miracles and learning to perform miracles themselves, and fearing for their own lives because of it. I wonder if they would have dropped their nets if they had known all that. And I wonder how often did they stand in a town being mocked and think, "Am I doing the right thing?" How many times did their wives or their families accuse them of abandoning them or call them lunatics? We know that Jesus' mother, Mary, actually sent his other brothers to come and get him because people thought he was unstable. So I wonder, how often did the disciples wonder to themselves if they were being foolish? How often did they question if they were following the Son of God, the Messiah, or if they had gone running down the wrong rabbit hole? And how often did they question if they truly had been called by God? My friend called me days before the testing procedure to see if she was a match for this total stranger. Now, she and I have known each other for 10 years, more than 10 years. We have known each other's struggles. We have also intimately known each other's calls. She said that she had been afraid to tell very many people about her decision because she feared people would call her foolish. Not everyone had been supportive. They said she was being rash. See, my friend was out driving and saw a billboard that said, "Verna needs a kidney." Gave a blood type and a phone number. Then in her church newsletter was a mention of this same woman who needed a kidney. My friend, she had never thought about doing something like donating a body part to someone else. But she said it was as if that sign and notice were specifically for her. And after she was matched with the woman from the billboard, the local news station interviewed my friend and asked her why she would donate a kidney to a complete, total stranger. And she just kept repeating, "God placed this in my heart and said, Jamie, I need you to do this." God calls us to unusual places, unusual circumstances, unusual endeavors. God doesn't care if others think we are fools. Imagine what Noah's neighbors said when he built this massive boat in his backyard and he didn't even have a trailer for it. Moses had to have seemed just a bit off when he came relaying this conversation with a bush. Someone saying God asked them to do something would make lots of people question their mental stability. Jamie couldn't have known what the recovery from a major surgery like that would be. She couldn't have known if Verna's body would accept that kidney. She couldn't know with any kind of certainty if all would be well. She had to place her trust in God and her faith in God to believe that even in those moments when her own anxiety flared up and I was getting calls late going, "Am I doing the right thing?" She had to know in her heart she was answering God's call. The disciples who dropped their nets and their vocations had to follow Jesus without knowing their future. And in their own anxiety, when those moments flared up and they wondered if this man was actually the Messiah, they had to trust that what they were doing was a call to a higher purpose. 3 months have passed since Jamie gave her kidney to a complete stranger because she heard God's voice speaking to her through a billboard. Both donor and recipient are doing very well. More than 2,000 years have passed since Andrew and Peter, James and John said yes to following a complete stranger. And the world is better off because they did so. Each of us here has a call placed on our lives, a call that others would very likely call us foolish for following. Success in answering that call may not look like we or others expect it to look. We may even feel a little foolish in the process. We may have plenty of doubts if we are truly doing what God calls us to do. But I promise you, the world will be better off because we do. And like my friend Jamie, who has the joy of knowing that her gift has made a world of difference for Verna and her family, we all at some point will know that the world is better off because we said yes to Jesus.